Diplomatic row breaks out between the UK and Russia. Russia expels a British diplomat in Moscow, claiming they're a spy, and the Foreign Office says the claims are baseless. Russia also goes further, banning members of the UK cabinet from entering the country in response to what it calls hostile actions. Well, back here, the government announces what it calls the biggest employment reforms in a generation. The Conservatives say they're ducking the tough choices needed to bring down the country's benefits bill. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson will join us live. She's on that new list of people banned from Russia. I'll also ask her about those new back-to-work plans. Also, tonight, ahead of Friday's vote in Parliament to legalise assisted dying, MPs are making up their minds on which side to back. Plus, the third in our series of Irish election leadership interviews. Tonight, it's the turn of Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin, whose party is currently topping the polls. And as Sir Jacob launches his new reality show, we'll look at other political figures who managed to have a second life away from politics on the small screen. All that and more with Margaret Hodge and Danny Kruger, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, firstly, tonight, there is some breaking news to bring you from the Middle East, where tonight, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced plans for a ceasefire in the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon that he's going to present to his cabinet.
I'm looking at all of the fronts simultaneously. I'm seeing the bigger picture. And I am determined to let our soldiers, our brave soldiers, and give them all of the means they need to stay alive, stay safe, and bring us the victory. And that's why tonight I will bring before the cabinet a plan for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack.
Well, we are expecting to hear from the US President Joe Biden this hour. We're hearing he's due to deliver those remarks from the White House Rose Garden, and of course, we'll bring you his appearance here live when it happens. In the meantime, though, let's go to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins us now from Jerusalem. Alistair, what do you make of the Israeli Prime Minister's remarks?
Well, I mean, I think it was a list of what he sees as his achievements over the last 14 months, not just in relation to the fight against Hezbollah, but also the war in Gaza. It was an attempt to try and convince an Israeli public, some of whom are sceptical about a ceasefire in Lebanon, that it is the right thing to do and it's the right moment to take this course of action. He was saying that if Hezbollah even dare so much as try and rearm or reposition themselves in southern Lebanon, then Israel would have the freedom to act against them, freedom guaranteed by the US government. So on that particular note, it'll be interesting to see and to hear what President Biden has to say when he delivers those remarks shortly in Washington. I think as I speak, the discussions are still going on in the Israeli cabinet. That statement by President Netanyahu was pre-recorded and was timed for Israeli prime time, but there has not yet been an official announcement that the deal has been approved by the Security Cabinet. There's been some suggestion in Israeli media that it has, but no official announcement just yet. And there will be dissenters within the Israeli cabinet. There'll be those, and some of them have already voiced their opposition to a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. So if Netanyahu is to get them on side, what does he have to give them in return? And I think, you know, when he said in his statement that one of the reasons for a ceasefire was to allow them to focus now on Gaza, That is, of course, in part to try and achieve a hostage deal in Gaza, to try and put Hamas under increased pressure, to try and demonstrate to Hamas that they are now isolated, now that Hezbollah would have entered into a ceasefire agreement. But also, it has to be said that there are pretty prominent voices here on the right of Israeli politics who would like to see Israel reoccupy Gaza. There's a lot of fear in the international community that what is going on in northern Gaza at the moment is a part of a strategy to those ends. And so could that be the trade-off that Netanyahu does to try and buy their support? But we will have to wait and see what the outcome is of the meeting as and when it concludes. It's been going on for a number of hours now.
Alistair, thank you very much indeed. As Alistair says, we'll have to wait to see what happens with that meeting. Thank you. Now, I just want to bring you the latest on the other big developing international story tonight, that Russia has banned members of the British government from entering the country, including the Deputy Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary. Now, the news comes after Russia expelled a British diplomat over spying claims. The UK says it's not the first time Moscow has made what it called malicious and baseless accusations against its staff. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is outside the Foreign Office for us this evening. John, what's happened?
Well, Sophie, this is the list, the banned list, if you like. 30 names on it. Most of them are members of Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet. His name's not on it, nor is David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. They've already been sanctioned. Also missing is John Healey. The same, no doubt, applies to him. But the list includes Angela Rayner, Yvette Cooper, Shabana Mahmood, Rachel Reeves, and including, the names are in full, so some middle names: Patrick Bosco McFadden, Edward Samuel Miliband, Wesley Paul Williams Streeting, and Hilary James Wedgwood Benn, for example, and indeed Bridget Maeve Phillipson, the Education Secretary. Now, this, of course, follows a dramatic day over in Moscow. Two things happened there. First of all, Edward Wilkes was named by the Russians as a diplomat being expelled. He is understood to be a second secretary, which is a relatively junior diplomatic rank in the embassy. The other development was that Nigel Casey, the British embassy, was shown by Russian state media arriving at the foreign ministry, and he was a replacement for the diplomat. Mr. Wilkes was a replacement for one of 6 British diplomats expelled earlier this year. So what is clear, Sophie, is that relations between Britain and Russia have tonight plunged to a post-Cold War low. Of course, it all follows the use of those Storm Shadow missiles supplied to Ukraine by the UK. And since then, the tensions has been rising between Britain and Russia. No tit-for-tat move yet from the UK government, but there has been an angry reaction to the developments. Downing Street has denied these allegations that the diplomat was a spy. We refute these allegations. Number 10 said they are baseless. We are now considering our response. And the UK, Number 10 and the Foreign Office have said that the UK government is unapologetic about protecting our national interests. We will now respond in due course.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there for us outside the Foreign Office. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking on the show to one of the members of the cabinet sanctioned by Russia, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. She's also here to talk about Labour's plan to get Britain working by attempting to get some of the 2.8 million people on long-term sickness benefits back into work. Now, in the past, people not in work were very visible. Queues outside job centres, that famous 1978 Conservative attack ad with the snaking line in front of the unemployment office captioned Labour's not working. But now there's almost an invisible epidemic of the economically inactive, a problem that's got worse since the pandemic and that is also driven by the number of people out of work because of mental illness. Well, let's bring in Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, shall we? Thank you for being on the programme. Lots to talk about on employment. But first, you've been sanctioned by Russia today. Do you have any idea why?
I've just heard of it as I've come on air now.
Really, that's the first time?
Just before I came into the studio. I mean, we stand resolutely behind the Ukrainian people, and we will do whatever it takes to maintain Britain's national interest. I mean, the advice already from the Foreign Office was not to travel to Russia. And as I say, you know, we've seen the appalling consequences of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian people and their government have our full backing. That was the case when we were in opposition. It's, you know, there has been cross-party support for that, and long may that continue.
So what's your message to Putin tonight, then?
Well, I wasn't planning a holiday to Moscow anyway, so I'm not sure it's any great loss. But my message is that...
Scratch that one off the calendar, then.
Yeah, I mean, my message is that, you know, we stand behind the Ukrainian people. That is the long-standing position of our country. I mean, we've seen the amazing generosity of people across our country in welcoming Ukrainian refugees to our shores. I think, that approach is the approach that we have taken from government, continuing the approach of the previous government, and that's exactly as it should be.
Are you concerned about, there's been a lot of talk about, a kind of hybrid war with Russia, like a kind of disruptive war, if you like, whether it's cyber attacks, obviously disinformation against public figures, including people like yourself. Is that something that's a concern?
I think it is a concern, and we saw, what happened on the streets in Salisbury a number of years ago too. So this is a long-standing challenge, but we will not allow ourselves to be distracted from the really important responsibilities that we have as a government to maintain Britain's national interest, but also the responsibilities that we owe to European security, and that includes our support for the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people.
OK. Now let's talk about your announcement today. We spend more currently on sickness benefits than we do on schools. Is that a problem?
I think the increase that we've seen in people who are economically inactive, including alongside that the increase in the benefits bill, although they're not the same thing because some of those people will not be receiving social security support, is a big problem. We're an outlier as a country in that other countries have recovered post-pandemic in a way that we haven't. We've still got more people out of work, economically inactive, than was the case before, and that's particularly acute for our young people. 1 in 8 young people, almost 1 million, who are not earning or learning. And the plans that we're setting out today, including around a youth guarantee, is about making sure that we get that support in place as quickly as we can, because we know where there is that failure, where we don't support our young people at the earliest possible point, it is just that bit harder to then get back into employment or training. And I've heard directly from lots of young people who desperately want that support, who can find themselves isolated sometimes because of mental health issues, and because perhaps they haven't left school with the qualifications that they need to get on. So there's a challenge in the school system too that I'm seeking to address, but alongside that, what more we can do as a country to make sure that everyone has the chance to play their full contribution.
You're talking a lot about the support that people need, particularly young people, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I guess for some people there's also a fairness argument that, they work hard, don't get paid much money, but they work an awful lot of hours, and then they see other people getting money from the state. Do you think there are some people claiming benefits who shouldn't be?
There'll always be a small minority of people who seek to game the system. That's always been the case under any government. But I think what we're talking about here is actually a significant number of people who, for reasons of physical health, mental ill health, and we've got big NHS waiting lists that is driving some of this inactivity, but also our young people who desperately want the chance to get back into work, to be in employment or training. And of course, conditionality within the system is important. It's important that if people are receiving support, then they're doing what's asked of them. I think it's also important for kind of public consent and understanding and support for that system, so that people don't feel that that there are people taking advantage. But the challenge, the scale of what we're facing at the moment goes way beyond that, and this is a really serious and endemic problem. And what we're setting out today in the Get Britain Working white paper is what more we as a government need to do to support people who are out of work and to support young people who are not earning or learning.
Another big priority in the white paper is effectively getting employers to do more as well. You say you want support for employers to recruit, retain and develop staff. But businesses have said that the rise in employers' national insurance contributions will make it harder to both retain and recruit staff. So you're effectively asking businesses to take a chance on people, right, who may have been out of the workforce for an awful long time, but you're making it more expensive for them to do so.
I hear what business have to say on this, and the Chancellor yesterday at the CBI set out the tough choices that we've had to make as a government. What she was also clear about is that whilst she's heard the feedback from business, what we're not hearing is how else we can approach this, what the alternative is. None of us wanted to be in a position of having to increase taxes in the way that we did. But the situation that we inherited with the economy has made us have to deal with some really tough choices.
That's your job, isn't it, to work out, it's not the businesses aren't going to tell you, oh, just cut defence spending or something, are they? Or like, scrap fuel duty. That's your decision as a government. Their job is to say, this is the impact it's having on ours, and they're saying it's going to be harder to recruit and retain staff.
Of course, they will argue their case. What businesses also need is a healthy workforce, a well-educated workforce, and in order to do that, we have to invest in our public services. We're talking about the big numbers of people who are economically inactive, who are not in work. And part of that is we've got far too many people on NHS waiting lists, waiting for operations, for surgeries, for appointments. So the investment that came through the budget for the NHS is crucial. Similarly for skills. We've got a big skills challenge as a country. It's time that we took skills more seriously. And what we've been able to do through the budget is to protect key areas of education spending, to do more to support business in areas like apprenticeship levy reform that they've been calling for, that we will bring in as a growth and skills levy so that they've got more flexibility as businesses to train the workforce, adult workers too. Yes, our young people, but we've got a big skills challenge as a country where we've got far too many people who lack the skills they need to access work.
Do you accept another big challenge, another big barrier to people going into work is childcare?
I do. It is a barrier. And, I'm with the Work and Pensions Secretary. I'm co-chairing the Child Poverty Task Force. And as a part of that, I've been speaking with lots of parents when I'm out and about speaking to providers too. They tell me that, yes, absolutely, childcare is a barrier. And, whilst we are rolling out childcare entitlements, we know that there are still big differences in different parts of the country. And that's why we're setting out plans to deliver more nurseries within primary schools where that space is opening up, to create places where the market has failed to do so.
Because some and I used to spoken about childcare in early years for an awfully long time, and lots of childcare providers are probably very excited, frankly, when you came in as Education Secretary. And yet many of them are now saying that they are really, really worried after the budget because of some of the impact on that, the rise in the minimum wage. And of course, they're going to have to pay these employers' national insurance contributions. I spoke to Zoe Raven a few weeks ago, who runs a nursery in Grimsby. She told me a budget will 100% drive some nurseries to close. Juna Sullivan of Leaf Nurseries, an amazing kind of group of social enterprise nurseries, said, I'm not sure how this has happened. I can't imagine a government that wants to be fair to working people intended to throw this curveball. Are you looking again at how the budget impacts nurseries?
I am looking carefully at this and I hear the concerns that they raise. And I understand the specific issue there, but alongside that, I would say we're putting, by next September, with the further rollout of childcare expansion, that'll be £8 billion we're investing. That's a significant sum of money. I do understand the pressures that are there overall. I am determined to reform the system. What we've inherited in terms of the rollout, we've had to fund, and I'm committed to making it work. But if you said to me, is this entirely how you would deliver a system where you just started from scratch? Then no, it would not be. And there are big challenges around workforce. Yes, in terms of what providers, as the providers that you've just described, would set out, but also about training, around support for staff, and around standards in early years provision. I want to much more closely align schools provision with early years provision.
So I get a sense that, we talked earlier about the barriers to work, that you're someone who gets this, partly because of your background. I was reading an interview that you gave with The Mirror a little while ago, speaking about how your mum didn't go back to work full-time until you started school because there was no childcare available. This is clearly a big reason why a lot of people are economically inactive.
It is a big reason, and I'm looking carefully at the reform that we need across the system to break down those barriers, to make it easier for parents to go back to work, especially mothers. It's often mothers who see that shortfall or end up in, not quite in the job that they would like, or turning down promotion opportunities, or not progressing in their careers because of childcare barriers. And it's especially a problem for people that are that bit further away from getting back to work, or who are facing other challenges in their lives. And as part of the Child Poverty Task Force, I've also heard from mothers in particular who, as well as all of that, are dealing with issues around housing, around support for older children who might have special educational needs. There is a really big issue around family support. Childcare and early years entitlements, and that really crucial education is a part of it. But what I'm also determined to deliver is more family help and early help. So the plans that I was setting out last week around children's social care is a big part of that too. We've got to move the system, yes, around early education, but also about investing more upfront to support families. At the moment, we are spending an awful lot of money as a country on crisis intervention when things have gone seriously wrong. And the reforms I've set out last week in Parliament around children's social care are precisely around that.
OK, thank you very much indeed,
Thank
Bridget Phillipson there, the Education Secretary. Well, of course, Labour's workplace reforms are sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us then will be the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Labour peer Margaret Hodge and the Conservative MP Danny Kruger. Great to have you both with us. Danny, we've been discussing the economically inactive, trying to get people back into work. Do you welcome some of what Labour's put forward today?
Well, I like what I heard insofar as I recognised it all, because much of what they're proposing was already underway. There is a genuine problem, and I thought Bridget was talking sense there about the challenges that we face in the workforce. And there are many, many people who are languishing on benefits, whether on sickness benefits, out of work benefits. Much of that has spiked since the pandemic. We've really struggled to get people back to work since then. But I'm afraid to say it's a long-term problem. Much of which we inherited when we came into government, but I'm afraid we didn't get on top of sufficiently. Many people did get into work under the Conservatives, increased employment by 1 million people. There's lots to be proud of, but I'm afraid, and the universal credit introduction definitely helped with reducing the dependence problem. Nevertheless, the way that work has changed has meant that we still have too many people on benefits.
So you say you didn't do enough on it, effectively?
Well, I'm afraid, we still have a genuine problem. And as I say, a lot of that was exacerbated by the pandemic, but it's a lot to do with just the way that work has changed, automation, globalisation, the changing nature of work in this country, and our skills system hasn't caught up with it sufficiently. What I'm disappointed by today is that while the government recognises the problem, which is kind of staring us in the face, what they've announced is a combination of repackaged Conservative policies, but also a commitment to a series of reviews and commissions which won't report until next year. And at the moment, we are looking at an enormous increase in the benefit bill, and I wish they were getting on top of it quicker.
I could see you shaking your head there a bit.
I am indeed, because my experience of the last Conservative government was that they destroyed a lot of the infrastructure that was there to support people with difficulties, whether it was mental health difficulties, long-term sickness, young people who are not in education or in training or in work, whether to support them back to work. And that comes from personal support. I think you destroyed the job centres. I have to say, as an MP, I watched it. They moved from being the places that people would go for that personal help to get them back. If I can finish, they moved from that into being just, doling out the benefit and cutting the benefit for people they thought didn't behave. Now, I think work is a right for everybody. I think it's a right for disabled people. I was the Minister for Disabled People when we started on that journey with the New Deal of Disabled. And it was quite a difficult argument in those days to get people to understand that work wasn't something we were imposing. It was a right. I know, and when I was a mother, when you took time out for your babies, when you had your maternity leave, you lost confidence. You lost sort of a feeling that you had a place in society. So work's really important. Those rights go with responsibilities, and that, I think, is exactly what Liz set out today in a really welcome way.
Well, let's try and achieve some common ground, because I recognise that when Margaret was in government back under the Blair years, they did start to introduce conditionality and encourage responsibility as well as rights, and I think that was the right approach. They didn't get on top of the endemic worklessness problem.
Well, we did a bit. We did a bit.
And Margaret, so did we. I mean, we greatly reduced youth unemployment. We increased the numbers of people in work. But let me just agree with you on your point about the importance of support. And we were introducing alongside universal credit, which was this rationalisation of the benefit system and increasing the incentives to work, introducing something called universal support, which was intended to provide all of that civil society
Danny, I saw
package.
that all destroyed. I saw that all destroyed.
So if we're going to have a partisan conversation, let's do it, and we'll talk about the inheritance that we had in 2010 and the absolute hollowing out of the public finances consequence on the last government. Anyway, we were
started so politely, didn't it?
Well, we were rebuilding that sort of ecosystem around young people and around employment with this universal support package. Today, Liz has announced something very similar. They're basically continuing it, which is good. Let's acknowledge that. I also want to agree with you about the importance of prevention. Agree with Bridget. I think she was talking sense there about the fact that we need to get ahead of some of these problems and invest more up front before problems get so acute. So I think we can probably agree about the overall shape of the reforms that are needed. They're talking about localising power as well.
Yeah.
But Where's the action? We've just got more promises of reviews. I wish they were getting on with it.
Well, hang on. She is taking action. She's very sensibly piloting programmes to find what works and bringing in, because it isn't just an issue for DWP. It is an issue for people getting the right mental health support. I remember going to watch a project when we first did the disability in a GP centre in Camden that was run by a voluntary organisation called Tomorrow's People, the leader of whom is now a Conservative peer, right? and I went there, and she got 200 people into work there. They cut the number of people who were on pills, really, to keep them going by a third. And out of those people, 75% of them stayed in work for more than a year. So you can, by personal support in the round, looking at health, looking at housing, looking at employment, looking at training, you can, in the round, bring people who've been long stay out of work into work. And can I just say one thing about young people? So I'm going on a bit. But one in eight young people are today not in training, education or in work. That is disaster. Now, some of that is COVID. I accept some of it is COVID. But the rest is really a hollowing out of those services to support those young people.
I mean, I thank you, and I agree with that, particularly about what you say about Debbie Steadman-Scott, who's the Conservative peer you mentioned, who's done all this brilliant work and is now in the Shadow DWP team with me, so I'm pleased to work with her. I do think there is a huge amount that can be done to support young people, but we also need to get the incentives right. And I'm afraid unless we're prepared to say, if you don't work, you won't get your benefits.
We've said that.
We've said that. So today I'm glad to say there was a commitment to that. You used to say it when you were in government. Labour have not been saying that. There was a hint of it today, but again, no detail. And I'm afraid I don't have a great deal of faith in your colleagues to see that through. We're out of time. Definite agreement on the difficulty, the thorniness, if you like, of the problem. Certainly many politicians are trying to grapple this before. We'll see if they have more success this time. And we'll have more from the panel, of course, later on in the programme. Now, as I mentioned, the other big story that is moving tonight is in the Middle East. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, I should say, has said he'll present a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon to his cabinet. In a speech tonight, we're also expecting a response from the US President Joe Biden, who is due to speak shortly in Washington, and we will bring you those remarks from the US President live. Well, in the build-up to Ireland's general election on Friday, we're speaking to the leaders of the major parties, all three of them. Now, these are the three leaders who, of course, vying to become the next Irish Prime Minister, or Taoiseach. We've already heard we've already heard on the last few days here on Sky News from Mary Lou McDonald. We had her on yesterday's programme, the leader of Sinn Féin, and also the current Taoiseach, Simon Harries of Fine Gael as well. Well, tonight it is the turn of Micheál Martin of Fianna Fáil. He has been speaking to our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins.
Micheál Martin, you have been a TD, a Member of Parliament, since the 80s. You've led your party for 13 years. You've been Education Minister, Health Minister, Enterprise Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Taoiseach and Taoiseach. Why would you want to be Prime Minister again?
Well, I'd love to continue my involvement in politics, and that's why I'm putting myself before the people. I mean, Ireland has made a lot of progress over the last number of decades, but we have very serious challenges facing us. We have a lot of unfinished business in a lot of areas, and housing in particular. And I'm very anxious to get on top of these issues and to really help meet those challenges into the future. I have led as Taoiseach through fairly difficult times and major shocks such as COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine and the consequential energy crisis that resulted from that. I'm engaged fully and very committed to public service and to making sure that we can meet the challenges that lie ahead.
You have already ruled out going into coalition with Sinn Féin. What's the democratic reason for that? I mean, if the people decide that Fianna Fáil should try to form a coalition government with Sinn Féin, shouldn't you have a go at it?
Well, I think it's a policy-based position, and there are fundamental policy differences between Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil, not least in the housing matter, because, for example, Sinn Féin want to crucify first-time buyers. They want to get rid of the Help to Buy scheme and the First Home Bridge the Gap scheme, two schemes that together, if you put them together, can give up to 80,000 to a first-time buyer. Sinn Féin want to get rid of those schemes. We have set up the Land Development Agency. It took us 2 years to set it up. It's a state agency to build housing on affordable and social housing and cost rental on state land, or in collaboration with private sector. Sinn Féin want to get rid of that and start again with a new national construction agency. All of that would take time. So Sinn Féin's housing policies would mean delay, disruption, and higher prices in the end of the day. And then more broadly speaking, we're a pro-enterprise party in Fianna Fáil. Sinn Féin doesn't get enterprise. And in my view, given that it's proposing $3.5 billion of tax hikes, it would destroy the small to medium-sized sector in Ireland. And then we are pro-positive Europeans. Fianna Fáil led Ireland into the European Union. Sinn Féin opposed it at that time and opposed every single treaty since then. And they're not positively, proactively pro the European Union. And that's a big issue because that had a transformative impact on modern Ireland.
Let's just stick with the housing issue for a moment, because Sinn Féin, of course, would say that you told people 4 years ago to vote for you because there was a housing crisis. But that crisis has deepened. In 2020, 10,246 people in emergency accommodation, and today it's 14,760.
Yeah, and we would say in return, we need to do more. We acknowledge the serious challenges facing us, but we have the better policies. And in particular, 125,000 houses were built over the last 4 years. So Fianna Fáil did take the portfolio. We did change momentum in housing. Fianna Fáil has got us back building houses again, but we need to do more. And now that we've put the foundations in terms of the Land Development Agency, in terms of the Planning Act that we have passed, we are saying let's get on with it now. We believe we can double housing input over the next 4.5 years over what we did in the previous 4.5 years.
Let's talk about the other big issue then, immigration. When the coalition came to office, immigration was less than 100,000. It's now more than 150,000. The figure for asylum seekers has risen from 4,000 to 33,000. Do you understand the concerns that ordinary people have about asylum seekers living in their areas? Or do you think those concerns are just whipped up by the far right?
No, I understand the concerns. There are very, very real concerns in communities across the country. There has been a very significant increase in those seeking asylum in this country, pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID is about 3,500 per annum. Now we're at about 14,000 to 15,000 per annum. And that's apart altogether from the impact of the Ukrainian war. And to be fair to the Irish people, they opened up their doors and schools and so on for those Ukrainians fleeing war. So there's an issue. We have to have a faster, firmer set of procedures to deal with those seeking asylum. Those who are not entitled to seek asylum should be returned, and we're part of the EU-wide Migration and Asylum Pact. That will enable us to do that more efficiently and effectively. Fianna Fáil is proposing a new Department of Domestic Affairs, which would take the migration issue in totality into one department. And also that would involve a border management agency, a national security function as well within that department. Now, I have to say, the entire issue is a consequence of a world in turmoil. Wars in the Middle East, war in Sudan, war in Ukraine, autocratic regimes in places like Eritrea and elsewhere. All of that is creating an appalling situation where many millions of people are migrating all over the world.
And into that global picture, we now have the re-election of Donald Trump. How will you dissuade him from carrying out his threat about imposing tariffs on imports from the EU and attracting big US multinationals back from Ireland?
Well, first of all, we have many American multinationals in Ireland. They create 200,000 direct jobs and about another 130 odd indirect jobs. So very significant factor in the Irish economy. Many of them are embedded here, and they're here over 30 or 40 years. These are global corporations. They need a European headquarters. They need to export to the European single market and to the EMEA region more generally. So it's not that simple as has been put forward. But I would say to you that the biggest threat to Ireland is external. I think and there are potential external shocks potentially could come our way. An Iranian-Israeli war, for example, could have devastating impact for the world economy. President Trump, if he proceeds with tariffs. But then I think corporate America may impact on him. He is a businessman fundamentally, and he will not want additional costs on American consumers. And as I have said, these American companies are global companies.
I want to ask you just about one eye-catching manifesto policy, decriminalising the possession of drugs. Which drugs and why?
Well, mainly cannabis is what we're looking at there, and there was work in the Parliament over the last number of years in Dáil Éireann, where there was a consensus that that there should be a health-led approach to drug use, and that we shouldn't be putting people with small amounts of cannabis for personal use through the court system, where they would have a criminal record for the rest of their lives. We're not proposing the legalisation of cannabis, but we are saying, and many political parties agreed with this, that we should move towards a more health-led project. We did this before with heroin. We brought methadone clinics in the 90s and early 2000s to deal with the heroin epidemic in Dublin at that time. And there's been a lot of research which is indicating a health-led approach, which means, by the way, more investment in resources in terms of addiction services, counselling, and really ramping up capacity in that area.
The relationship with the next-door neighbours in the UK has been a bit bumpy, largely because of Brexit, but Mary Lou McDonald says in her first conversation with the British Prime Minister, if she was Taoiseach, she'd be demanding a referendum on Irish unity. Is she right?
No, I think my view is, look, I'm a Wolfe Tone follower, and the focus being on uniting people, Protestant, Catholic and dissenter. That's always been my creed, and I put practical flesh on the bone of that when I became Taoiseach and I set up the Shared Island Initiative, the most consequential initiative since the Good Friday Agreement itself. We put $1 billion behind that initiative to get a lot of projects done, research projects between universities north and south, the narrow water bridge talked about for 25 years, now after commencing, the Ulster Canal being finished, the geopark in Cuilca between Fermanagh and Cavan, purchased by the Shared Island funding, 25 local authorities working with each other across the border on various projects, the arts working together on various art projects, and the list goes on. And then thousands of people involved in a Shared Island Dialogue series, young people, women, New Irish, climate and biodiversity, all-island network. To me, that's the pragmatic flesh on the bone. Let's build reconciliation. We've had enough of rhetoric. If rhetoric and all of these calls that Sinn Féin go on about, we've had that for 75 years. It didn't achieve a whole lot. But it's getting behind reconciliation. It's about people. And I've always been inspired by Seamus Mallon saying, one time in the launch of his book, and he was talking about his neighbour who was a planter 400 years ago. Well, he said, it's about time we learned how to share this piece of ground that we call home.
Micheál Martin, thank you.
Well, you can scan the QR code on your screen now to watch David Blevins' full interviews with all three of the leaders of Ireland's three biggest parties ahead of the general election on Friday. Well, this week on the Politics Hub, we're, of course, also building up to a vote on Friday on the bill to legalise assisted dying. Now, MPs will get a free vote, which means they can follow their consciences rather than party policy. Our political correspondent, Liz Bates, has spoken to three MPs with different views on the issue. Here's her report, a warning that it does contain references to suicide.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. A town hall meeting, but with huge consequences that could change how and when we die.
Tonight is not a debate, and it's not about winning an argument, it's about having a conversation.
Labour's Peter Swallow, like MPs up and down the country, must decide whether to support assisted dying in a free vote later this week. But first, he wants to hear from his constituents, many of whom have personal stories to tell.
Her natural death would have been bedbound, blind, unable to swallow, unable to communicate, and she would have laid there until she suffocated. She didn't want that.
How can the doctors and the nurses take this choice? How do they make that as a decision for themselves?
We are created in God's image. Only He can decide when and how we die.
This week we'll see the first Commons vote on the issue in almost 10 years, but it's the first time there's a real chance the law could change, and new MPs are feeling the weight of responsibility.
The vote on the assisted dying bill is probably one of the most ethical quandaries that is facing this Parliament.
Usually you just vote with your party. This is different. Does it feel like a very personal decision?
Absolutely. Death is a personal subject. I hugely respect the principle that everyone should have a choice in how they end their lives. I think it's just about making sure the right safeguards are in place.
This is proper grassroots politics. A public meeting in a town hall, an MP genuinely undecided, and the issue a matter, literally, of life and death. The discussion that's had here tonight and in meetings like this up and down the country will inform the vote next week on a landmark piece of legislation.
Well, there's some really worrying parts of it. You know.
Conservative Harriet Baldwin voted against assisted dying in 2015 and is concerned that changing the law would put pressure on patients and doctors. She also has a personal story, as she almost lost her father.
He was effectively dead at points. Although the doctors did not think that my father would make it, they did keep him alive, and for 98 days in intensive care, no one thought he would make it through. He made it through. He lived to see his grandchildren grow up, and we're so blessed that we had him for those extra 20 years.
What do you make of the latest legislation? They say that they've put as many safeguards in place as they can to try to reassure MPs.
I think it's very difficult to say definitively that someone is going to die within the next 6 months. But there's also the matters of conscience for doctors themselves. As you know, the legislation calls for 2 doctors to certify that someone wants to kill themselves and that they will help them. And if you go to a doctor who doesn't want to do that, they are legally required in this legislation to refer you to someone who will. And I think that puts our doctors in a very difficult position.
On the other side of the country and the debate, Labour's Jeevan Santa is finishing off a day of meetings in his Loughborough constituency. Many have reached out to him on the issue, including Gordon, whose brother died of cancer.
It was very, very painful, and he definitely wanted to go. Oh no, he said, I don't want to go home. I just want to get this over. These are things which make me feel that really assisted dying is long, long overdue.
And look, we should be clear that 17 people die every single day. People like Gordon's brother, for whom palliative care cannot allay their pain. They are built a tolerance to opioids, they're allergic to them, you can't just pump them full of morphine. It was a few years ago now, but my uncle was dying and I was there with him, and it wasn't a pretty sight, as it were. And I remember I walked out of there, and my dad turned to me and he goes, I don't want to die like that. And I looked at my dad and I was like, I don't want you to die like that. I don't want my mum to die like that. I don't want anyone to go through that.
Back in Berkshire, as the discussion comes to an end, the vote draws near. On Friday, MPs will finally decide whether to take the first step on what could be a groundbreaking journey. Liz Bates, Sky News, Sandhurst.
Well, it's such an emotive issue. If you have been affected by the issues raised in Liz's report, help is available from the Samaritans 24 hours a day. You can get in touch with them using the contact details on your screen. Call 116 123 or email jo@samaritans.org. Let's talk again to Margaret and Danny. Look, it's so hard. Like, MPs will be wrestling with their consciences. Many will have very strong beliefs, others will be undecided, but it is perhaps one of the most important votes we could see for a generation. You two, I think it's right on different sides of the debate here. Margaret, how would you vote?
I would vote for having the second reading, which would then give 6 months, a long, long time, for people to consider the actual details of the bill. And then, I cannot see why people can't vote for the second reading. I hope, Danny, that you see that argument too, because just that allows the debate about the details to take place. And then, if people remain unhappy, you can come back. And just from a personal point of view, I am somebody who would like the choice, really. It's all about personal choice and personal control over having had a really good life. I would like a good death. And what it sort of would give to me, and I'd say this as well to Danny, I might not want to do it. I might be told I've got 6 months left and I think I want every day and I want an extra day. I still say I'm going to decide what I'm going to do when I'm 90. I'll decide when I'm grown up, what I'll do then. But I want that reassurance of knowing that that's an option. And if the pain and of dying becomes so horrible for me, that reassurance of knowing it's there was really, really important to me personally. And I don't think people, you or anybody else, should stop me having that, or actually the thousands of people. The older people feel this more strongly. It's really interesting.
I'm going to give you lots of time to talk about your own. But can I just ask, are you frightened of death now, of having a sort of a painful death, or not the death that you want?
I've seen, I mean, I am of an age where, you know, I've seen a lot of death around me, and I've seen some terrible deaths, and I don't want that terrible death. I really don't. I mean, my brother-in-law, my closest friend, my father, you know, had my husband, actually, who also died, had a good death, you know, and that was all right. But I have seen horrible deaths, and that's why I keep saying, you know, it's the reassurance of knowing that if you're in that situation where the palliative care doesn't help, I don't see it as an alternative to palliative care. I'd love to see improvements in palliative care, where the palliative care doesn't help, and I just feel, you know, humiliated. It's not how I want to end my life. I just want that reassurance of knowing I've got that option there. And that's really, really important to me. And I know from one of the interesting things on all the polling is people who are older, probably who've had to experience more death in their lives because they're older, are those who most support the assisted dying. And I don't see it as murder. I just see it having a good life. I want a good death.
It's such a emotive subject, and people will feel so strongly for their own views on this. Danny, I know that you've come down on a very different side of the argument. It's something that you feel very strongly about as well.
So there's a lot here, and I think Margaret's made the case very, very eloquently for the reason for this bill, and I understand so much why people want it, especially those who've got experience of or who have real reason to fear a bad death themselves. There's so much here. But by the way, the point about older people supporting this, that might well be the case. The polling is very difficult to actually get underneath. Let's leave aside public opinion, because I think it's very contested. What we do know is that most palliative care doctors oppose a change in the law because they recognise the danger that a change would represent to the people who are dying, the people who have most experience of working with people at the end of life. So there are many practical objections, and I thought that your little film articulated some of them, including this big one about it's impossible to determine how long people have got to live. But I think the main argument to make is the one that I need to counter, is the one that Margaret made about choice. And I really do respect that, because we all really, really deserve and want control as much as possible about the end. My concern, and the experience of jurisdictions around the world which have brought this law in, is that paradoxically it reduces the choices that people have. Because what happens is that when you have this option in the healthcare system, resources and medical decision-making get skewed in this direction because it is a cheaper option for the medical system. It's also, frankly, I'm afraid to say, this is a difficult point to make, but it's an important one. It's often the choice that families themselves think would be best for their loved one. People might decide it's best for themselves. They don't want to be a burden. And this point about being a burden is an enormous kind of motivation for people who choose to end their lives early. And I really worry, and if we could design a law that met the case that Margaret is making for that small number of people who we can all understand why it might be best for them to go early, that didn't also potentially include a large number of vulnerable people. And another group that are really opposed to a change is the disabled people. There's disabled people very, very concerned about what it might mean for them. So I don't think we can write a law that is safe. And what I worry about, just to quickly finish, is that, frankly, all of this conversation we're having is a prelude to all of the money and all of the political attention going into this option of assisted dying, when really what we all need and what we agree on is we should be investing in palliative care. And until we've got a palliative care system that we can be really proud of, that everybody has access to the support they need at the end, I don't think we should take this enormously significant step.
I just want to come back on this, Danny, that what I would urge you to do is give the bill a second reading so we can discuss the detail.
I'd love to take on that point.
And the reason I say that as well is that the current law is awful. So 600 or so people die every year. Some of them can afford to go to Switzerland, but if they go to Switzerland, they die without their families because there's fear that the families will then get charged. Others commit suicide, and then you get this terrible thing of families grieving for their loved ones and being being questioned by the police in case there was assisted dying. So the current law is broke. So we've got to do something. And that's why I'd say give it a second reading, look at the details, and if you're right at the end, you can vote against.
OK, well, I mean, I have looked very closely at the detail. Quickly on the second reading point, I'm afraid I don't want to say you're a greatly more senior parliamentarian than me, Margaret, but no, the point is, when you vote for something on a second reading, you are happy with the bill as it is. You might want to see it improved, you might want to see it improved, you might believe in the possibility of improvement, but you would be happy for this bill to pass. And that is what the second reading vote will mean. And the fact is, and I'm sure you do know this, private members' bills, they don't get amended. The bill will be packed by its supporters. There won't be enough time to properly amend it. This is the moment at which you are either for this bill or against it. Obviously, if it passes, then I will try and amend it, but I will not succeed. It will go through. But lastly, on your related point about the fact is, I'm afraid to say, palliative care really does need improvement. And we should not be, the fact that some people commit suicide, we should not be saying, how can we make that easier for you? We should be trying to prevent suicide in this country. We should be making it easier for people to die well, not offering them a chance of an artificial death.
I could really talk about this for an awfully long time with both of you. I really appreciate the fact we've had such a respectful and eloquent debate on it as well, about something that I know both of you feel very passionately about, so I appreciate that a lot. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Jacob Rees-Mogg launches his post-parliamentary career with a new reality TV show. We'll look at the career changes of previous recovering politicians.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, calls to make prison work for women. We've seen figures that suggest female inmates are half as likely as men to have a job within 6 months of leaving prison. And unemployment is one of the main causes of reoffending. Also tonight, as a new documentary tells the incredible and harrowing story of the Boxing Day tsunami. I'm going to be joined in the studio by a woman who has a miraculous story of survival, and the Sky News cameraman who witnessed the devastation firsthand. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends.
We've got a heck of a race.
This is when the Premier League properly clicks into gear. With the reigning champions against perhaps their most likely challengers.
Liverpool, Manchester City,
The summit meeting of English football's top two.
Liverpool, Manchester City on USA.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg was, of course, one of the most recognisable MPs in the country over the last decade, but having lost his seat at the election, he's now about to launch a TV show, and he's not alone.
I can sort of see you. Yeah. It's slightly like Big Brother is watching you. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I've been involved in some political controversy. I'm afraid, and this is probably a sin, I quite enjoy winding people up.
I hope I don't get a cease and desist letter from Johnny Bowden. Could you please not wear my clothes? You awful Tory right-wing fox-hunting Brexiteer.
Would you consider you and your family to be posh?
We have quite posh accents, so yeah, if we're being real, we're quite posh, yeah.
So, Danny, are you going to be watching? Are you tuning
Certainly,
in?
yes, definitely. Yeah, what channel is it on? Not on Sky?
No, it's not on Sky. But, we're very equal opportunities on Politics Hub.
I'm so impressed by that. I mean, Jake is both a serious character and, a great comedian, and he manages to be both. And we saw the comedy side there, and so I think he'll make great TV. But he's also, underneath it, a serious thinker, and I think made a very important contribution to our politics and our national life. So I hope he's back. Actually, I hope he comes back in some form. But I think his TV programme will be great fun.
Are you tempted to launch your own reality show after leaving
I don't think so. I often say there's a lot in common between actors and politicians, because we both have to perform and we have to communicate. I used to laughingly say that actually politicians were often failed actors. That's what I wanted to be when I was young.
Oh, was it? Was it really?
But and I remember actually Glenda Jackson was the person that she was a fantastic. She was an absolute star of mine. Looked up to her immensely. When she then became a politician, it was great, and she did use a bit of the same skills. So we sort of have to develop the same skills, don't we, in politics? Because you've got to communicate.
It reminds me a bit of football players. Like you have this glittering career, and then what do you do after it's all over? I mean, can be quite brutal for politicians as well, right?
I think Jacob's going to be fine, as you can tell. And like I said, I hope he'll be back. I do, but yes, I really feel for a lot of my colleagues who lost their seats at this election. Margaret would have been through the same. It is a very, very tough thing. You fall very hard and fast at the end of when the public boot you out. But anyway, Jacob looks like he's landed on his feet.
Yeah, he's probably okay. Yeah. Are you going to be watching?
I don't think so.
Go on, Margaret.
I don't think. I do listen to Ed Balls. And,
there you go.
Yeah, I do listen to that one.
Another famous politician with a glittering TV career.
It's quite fun. It's one of the podcasts that I do listen. I also listen to Harriet Harman on
Electoral Dysfunction.
Electoral Dysfunction, which is a Sky one, and I love that one with Ruth Davison. That's a really good women's one. So there are ways in which you can carry on communicating and talking.
Always a podcast available. Thanks both very much indeed. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. I'll see you tomorrow.